moving on. Please keep tweeting. The Twitter handle is #DOIS19, and also you can drop your questions for the panel discussion at the Excellent booth. Okay, I now call upon Mr. Saurabh Gupta, our next speaker. A brief introduction about Mr. Saurabh. So, Mr. Saurabh is a senior developer advocate DigitalOcean. Saurabh is a tech enthusiast with over decades of experience into software industry. His focus areas and expertise is around DevOps, cloud automation, CI/CD, Kubernetes, and security. He is also a speaker at technical conferences and meetups and an author at tech sites. He is also a part of CNCF Speakers Bureau. Welcome, Mr. Saurabh. His topic of presentation would be best practice for securing your Kubernetes cluster. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Audible at the back? Yep. Okay. Cool, guys. So, thanks for that introduction. I'm Saurabh. I'm a developer advocate with DigitalOcean. It's a cloud computing company. So something like Google and AWS Cloud. We are also a cloud provider. And as you can see, the topic of today's discussion is going to be about Kubernetes. Everyone is talking about Kubernetes, what it is, how to implement. But I think there are a couple of people or enterprises who have moved to the next level. They've already run it. They have their production systems running on Kubernetes. But with every good thing comes there are certain like bad features or potential risk, right? So we are going to talk today about security on Kubernetes cluster. Is your Kubernetes cluster secure? That's one. If yes or no, if no, what to do? And if you're already doing Kubernetes or planning to do Kubernetes, there are some basic guidelines in terms of security world. So I would be sharing some of the security best practices going forward. Before we start, what I would like to understand is how many of us are already using Kubernetes on production? The production workload on Kubernetes. That's it? No one from this side? Oh. Anyone from security? SecOps, DevSecOps, okay, I see a couple of. So just forgive me, I'm not a security pro. I'm more into cloud side of it, so anything going out of way or which doesn't align with your definition, please forgive, yeah. So as based on the audience, I understand other people are more interested about like the Kubernetes and the security aspect. Maybe you are trying to explore or you are trying to evaluate how to do it. So yeah, this is not going to be like more of a, I mean, I treat security as a pretty serious topic, but this is not going to be a serious session. It's more, I try to make it fun-oriented, just to keep it simple. But yeah, just keep in mind, it's all about security. Your production infrastructure running on Kubernetes needs to be secure. Your data, your customers' data, everything is inside there, right? So I'm just going to narrate a small story, and that's going to be the talk of the topic. I have a developer friend called Joe, who is a passionate developer, and he is like totally into software coding, and he's like totally a nerd about it. So this is a story about Joe, who was told by the management to get or basically implement containers, so Docker, Kubernetes, and get everything running into a production machine. So let's talk about Joe and how he did it. Yeah. So agenda for today's talk is why we need to secure our Kubernetes cluster. There are some vulnerabilities that have been discovered in the Kubernetes ecosystem, be it Kubernetes, be it ecosystem like Istio or Docker, the CNI that it uses. What are the potential risks if these vulnerabilities are available? How to fix them? Some of the best practices and some of the commonly used container security tools is what I'll try to discuss, but I since have only 26 minutes, so yeah, I'll try to make it fast. So in case there are any questions, we can take it after the session, or maybe I'm available outside, we can discuss it offline. So this is Joe. He's a passionate developer, and as you can see, it's all about coding, that's his world. And the manager told him that, do you know containers? No. Do you know Kubernetes? I've heard about it, I don't know. Go read and implement, get it done by your team. That's it. So this poor guy, he came to me and told, this is what I have to do. So I told him the way. I think he has implemented and the things are working in production system. But we know not all days are good days, right? So there was a deployment. See, somehow managed some containers, some images, and then he told, I'm not too sure, should we deploy? Management said, yes, go ahead, deploy. What's the issue? He's like, I'm not too sure. No, go ahead and deploy, nothing happens. But yeah, what can go wrong? Things can go wrong. Things do go wrong in production, right? That's why I think Sakina was talking about monitoring solutions. We have DevSecOps, monitoring, and a lot of things. So yeah. Now comes, why do we need to secure a Kubernetes cluster, right? Why? So there is an online, I'll say, tech forum or an online tech company called NewStack. And they've done a survey 2019, and they have found that 46% of the users, the biggest worry about Kubernetes cluster is security aspect, and which rises to 55% when we're talking about larger enterprises. So security is a great concern for now enterprises. They are giving it a serious thought, and I'm happy about it. Cool, so this is one of the whys. Now, when I said some recent vulnerabilities have been discovered, we were using Kubernetes blindly. Everyone's following it, and we were taking it and doing it. But we were not aware what are we running on our production systems. As a matter of fact, not only Kubernetes, even Docker is not too secure, right? We do a lot of public images pull, because assuming that everything is fine. But that public repository belongs to someone else. How do we trust him? There's a lot of trust factor. Your production systems using an image that is written by someone else. So there are two basic vulnerabilities. One was discovered in 2018, 100/2105. And this is as grade 9.8 vulnerability. They have a grading. So CV basically stands for common vulnerability and exposures. So I think the security guys know about it. All your security vulnerabilities are treated in, like, given some numbers like this from all the software aspect. So this was a severe thing that was found, and it says like it has a rating of 1 to 10. So this stands at 9.8, a highly potential risk. There was another one that was discovered in 2019, which gives your like kubectl cp command, the copy command. If you can compromise that, an attacker can use it to like get into your system and do some mischievous act. So this is about Kubernetes, that some key vulnerabilities are there. Apart from that, CNI that the Kubernetes uses, that is basically your Docker thing, that also has been found vulnerable with some of the vulnerabilities like this. I think if you're talking about Kubernetes and people using it, you must be aware of this service mesh called as Istio. A lot of people are nowadays talking about it. It's a CNCF open source project, picking a lot of hype nowadays. So everyone talking about Istio, how to do it, that's also vulnerable. We have vulnerabilities there. So 2 vulnerabilities have been discovered in 2019 in Istio. So it's like what happens is we do an open source project, people start contributing without even too much of validation. When it's a global project, just imagine how do you do validation? There might be a slight loophole, which could be potentially tracked or taken like in a wrong way by the attackers. So that's about Kubernetes and the ecosystem. Everything is vulnerable with CVEs over there. That's a common vulnerability and exposures. So what are the risks? I mean, okay, fine, you understand there are vulnerabilities, but that shouldn't stop us from using Kubernetes or Docker or, as a matter of fact, Istio, right? Yes? If there is a vulnerability or if there's a problem, there should be a solution to it. So let's talk about the potential risk over there. So the one that we talked about, 100/2105, that's like the 9.8 thing. So if someone gets, that basically, in a nutshell, gives admin privileges to your cluster. So if someone gets into it and makes use of it, he has admin access. Anything running on your Kubernetes cluster is all handled by him. And he can use it in either way, right? So inject malicious code into your containers, bring down your entire cluster, change permissions, do a lot of stuff. So other vulnerability, that is like the 100/2101. So he can plant a malicious binary inside your container, and then they can exploit it. With the Istio thing, there are potential risks both from inside the cluster and outside the cluster. So if you're using Istio with an infected malicious software or that vulnerability, you are at risk from within the cluster as well as outside the cluster. Now the next thing is, are you at risk? You might be. If you're running your production grades on Kubernetes, you might be at risk, you might not be. Depending upon what versions are you using it, are you aware of these vulnerabilities? Secondly, have you updated in the recent past? So if you're still using Kubernetes 1.0 to 1.9, one of those versions which are old ones, I assume no one is using right now, you need to update. You need to stop and update. The one that we were talking about, the 9.8 vulnerability, has been fixed going forward version 1.10.11. So if you're using anything above that, you are safe. But anything less than that, you are still at risk and you are not aware. For the Istio thing, you have to like upgrade yourself to one of these versions for different vulnerabilities. So one of the key things is just keep an update or just keep a check on the ecosystem. Keep yourself updated about the tools and technologies that you're using from a cyber perspective also in terms of security. And just keep on releasing, like people keep on releasing the latest patches. Do keep on patching them or updating them with the latest version, which is not vulnerable. So are you at risk? You might be if you are using one of them. If you are not using one of them and you are updated to the latest one, you are like risk-free at this point of time. So security best practices while designing a Kubernetes cluster. So we talked about what are the common vulnerabilities. Are you at risk? You might be if you're using those systems. Now what are some of the best practices that we are going to discuss when designing a cluster, right? So we are at a DevOps event, and this is about DevOps with some talks about DevSecOps. So I have seen mostly there is a wall of confusion between the DevOps thing, right? There is a dev guy, there is an ops guy, and it's always passing the ball between two of them. Who does what? Still not too clear. So there is a wall of confusion there. I think it's much better now as compared to like a couple of years back when we started with the DevOps revolution. And this is the typical thing when things broke into production, and that is a DevOps reaction because of a security flaw. So most of the times, if you don't have a specific security guy or DevOps, what do we say, DevSecOps guy, this is what happens. I have no idea what's going on. Everything was fine from my side. Developer did his job. We did the CI/CD part. Everything was fine. We did the monitoring part. Everything was fine. What broke? I never knew. That could be a security angle assigned to it. So that's a common reaction which I've seen most of the times. Okay, so starting with some of the best practices, talking about cluster. So Kubernetes gives you an option for authentication, authorization, and admission control, all three of them, which are helping you in a way to tighten security on your Kubernetes cluster. So there's authentication, where you can have your Kube API server component control the request. So what all requests are going through your control plane, you can decide. Who accesses what, you can decide. So there are different authentication schemes you can see. So there are bearer tokens, there are basic auth, there are OpenID Connect, a lot of options. Now, I think with the latest Kubernetes offering, there are a few more security changes that have been updated in a new patch. I have not included them. But by default, anonymous authentication is enabled on Kubernetes, by default. You can disable that using anonymous auth false flag. So you need to use that flag, and you can disable it. RBAC, I think that's a common thing which I guess anyone running a production-grade server on Kubernetes is using, right? Role-based access control. Based on your roles, responsibilities, teams, you are using access control. Who accesses what? So that's a common one. I think everyone is aware of it. So that's the way to do it. Authorization mode equal to RBAC, you enable that. And I think it's after 1.6. So I guess no one is using 1.6 anymore. So anything less than 1.9, you are still vulnerable to security flaw. Right? Namespaces. That's one of the common thing. I think you might be aware about it in terms of namespaces. But I mean, using namespaces for isolation is a great way to separate your workloads. So you use namespaces to separate your workloads in different environments. And that's a way, like, it isolates in terms of your operation also. Who does what in terms of different teams, what workloads are running in different namespaces. That's one way to separate out the workloads. There is an option to define cluster network policies. We should use that if you are still not using it. So if you read the first line, Kubernetes by default does not restrict traffic between pods. It does not, by default. But you have to do it explicitly, defining your network policies. So you should use network policies to do that. Harden your node security. There are different ways to do it. So you have to ensure that your host is secure, configured correctly, control network access to sensitive ports, and minimize administrative access to Kubernetes nodes. Not every team or everyone should have an admin access. There should be like a specific set of team, mostly a DevOps team or if needed a data ops or SecOps, who should have administrative access to the Kubernetes cluster. Everyone else should be restricted. Then this one is another interesting policy that Kubernetes gives you, if you are aware of it. Pod security policy, which you can enable on a cluster level. So this is the pod security policy that you can enable on a cluster level to make your clusters more secure. So at a cluster-wide level, you can define resources and quotas and those things using a cluster, this pod security policy, how to do it and what to do it. And so, yeah. That's a common one. Use trusted authorized images. So any kind of a Docker images should be from a trusted source. Mostly even, I think it should be your private repository if you're using a public image. Use a scanner somewhere in your pipeline. Most of the time we have seen Jenkins as being a CI/CD tool. So you have an option to add scanners, and there are a lot of scanners, image scanners available publicly, if you don't want to go for like a paid enterprise version, right? So do make sure that all your images that are coming into your production, or not even production, any environment, right? Why only production? All environments should be treated in the same way. Any kind of a fault in maybe your testing or dev or UAT could propagate to your production, maybe without your knowledge. So yeah, sorry for using only production part, but yeah, it should be any environment. Make trusted images. Resource isolation using quotas. So you have an option to do resource isolation using quotas. So I guess if you're using Kubernetes, you must be aware of this. You can limit your resources, CPU, memory, and those kind of things you can define. What, at a pod level, how much to use, what to use. Bastion host, so that's a, I'll say a common practice. It should be a common practice, right? Bastion host or a jump server. You should not have a direct SSH access. Use a jump server or a Bastion host to log into one of your remote servers, machines. So that way, that's another layer of security that you have added. No one can access it directly. There is a Bastion host. If something happens, it happens on the Bastion level. So you can bring it down or like investigate. Upgrade to the latest version. Definitely, we have seen that most of the old versions are still vulnerable. So upgrade to the latest version. Keep aware of like the latest patches coming into security. There are communities. So even the Kubernetes, I mean, if you directly go to the Kubernetes site, they have the security update kind of a column where they talk about the security things. They give you what are the security updates, which version should be used with ecosystem. So when you are using Kubernetes with Istio, this is the combination you should use. So that is all available publicly, and you should make use of it. Turn on audit logging. So yes, that's more of a best practice from a general perspective, not only security, but yes, you should have audit logs enabled for your environment for any kind of a issue. Because if you have logs to trace back, it's easy when you have a production issue. What if you don't have an audit log enabled? You don't know what's happening on your cluster or your machine. And then if the cluster breakdowns or there is a production issue, it's very difficult to get back. So all kind of monitoring and audit logging should be enabled, right? So those are some of the key best practices that we have been following. But these are not the ones that like limited ones that we should look. We have a couple of more things. Due to shorter time, we have like, I have tried to cover most of the key ones that we should follow. So network policies, Bastion host, RBAC, and those things should be definitely followed. The pod security policy is a great way, trust me. So yeah, that's another one. I mean, that's the one that I do advocate normally. So let's talk about some tools. So I'm not advocating any particular tools. These are some of the ones which are doing great in the market, and some of them are public, some of them are private, licensed versions. So yeah. And you remember Joe, the story we started, right? The developer friend. So this was the discussion I had with him over coffee. He is like allergic to beer and drinks. So I had a discussion over coffee. I gave him some tips. And he followed these tips for the best practices. So I think he should be happy. But before we see his reaction, how he is doing, let's talk about some of the tools that are available in the market. So yeah, you can have a look. I mean, there are many more available. These are the key ones that I feel are available. They could be on your image security side. They could be very specific to your container security, or they could be generic tools, right? So I'll not say these are the top 10, but these are, yeah, some of the best tools that are available right now in the market. But then, yeah, keep your eye open from a security perspective. What and when, how. Okay, I still have 9 minutes, yeah. Before I proceed and come back to Joe, let me ask you people, like, I see a couple of people who are already working into security, DevSecOps, and security side of it. This side, there was no one on security. So what do you people feel about security? How important is this? Do you think it's important, and does your management understand the importance of security? Yes? So you know it's important. What about the management? And if the management doesn't understand it's important, how do you make them understand? By showing this presentation, okay, yeah, that's a great idea. I can share this deck with you. You can always showcase it back. But yeah, trust me, as I said, I'll try to keep it light, but don't take the topic lightly. That's my key intent. Security is a key aspect, which I have seen has been neglected for a long time. We saw the survey. What, 46% are now worried about Kubernetes security, but it's not only related to Kubernetes. At all levels, be it your application level code, be it your data ops, or whatever middleware or other things that you're using. I think each layer should have a security aspect attached to it. How you do it is your outlook. I'm not saying go and like design a specific team for it, but then at least have that kind of a knowledge within your team, that people are aware. So starting from like a developer who is developing a code, he should have that mentality that it should be secure. As we talked about, right? So developer is more about coding. He's using a specific language, he's a master of it. You put a pressure on him to use Docker. He pulls some random Docker images and adds some lines, and that's done. So yeah, make sure either you do a scan, or make him understand the importance of vulnerability, and he uses correct images. So yeah, those were some of the tools which were available. Let's talk about Joe, how he's doing. But before that, yeah, so the conclusion for me is, think for yourself, don't be a sheep. What does it mean? What other people are doing, we normally do. Everyone talking about Kubernetes, we do implement Kubernetes. Everyone is doing Docker, let's do it. Why should we do it? So don't be a sheep, don't follow the herd. Take a call for yourself, it's your infrastructure. If something happens to it, if it messes up, you are the one who's going to clean the shit. No one else is going to come, right? So it's not the community or the others who are doing it for a fancy thing, but it's your call. So this is all about Joe. He implemented those security practices, and they are having a party time. So even if you want to have a good time, don't want to spend your weekends over pager duty alerts and those things, Slack. Do implement security monitoring, logging, all those things, tracing, and that will definitely help you in the long run. So thanks for being a lovely audience. If you have some questions, I might be open to it, or I might take it offline. Yeah. We can take one question from, okay, sure. Okay, they asked me one and I asked them two. Okay, that's good, yeah. So any questions on the security side, any doubts? Oh, these are like security people, right? No? Okay, yeah, anyways, yeah.
Yeah, the question is, so we do run KubeBench very meticulously, but then that doesn't mean that it catches all the vulnerabilities.
No.
And then even in 2019, we have like 3 major security issues with respect to Kubernetes clusters. So how do we rely on the security tools? We run it as part of the product lifecycle, but they're not yielding the bugs which we expect them to.
See, your expectations and the tools working might be on a different level. I don't say that they catch all the vulnerabilities, but they give you at least an option to showcase some of the vulnerabilities that are present in your system, right? So along with Workbench, you can go, if possible, and the pocket allows, for some enterprise level tools. If you can convince the management, you have some enterprise level tools which do a great vulnerability hunting, which I'll say. So, if we talk about in a different way, all the tools don't catch, I agree. So you have a stepney in your car, doesn't mean 2 tires can't get flat, right? Even if the stepney is flat, 1 more tire is flat, what do you do? So it's just a backup option. Those tools are just a backup option to help you when, even before getting into a situation. But it's not like they're 100% foolproof. That's why I say I don't advocate them. Use on your own choice and will. Okay, so now my time.
You can ask the questions.
Sure. Pretty simple one. I think I've answered it twice or thrice. So yeah, anyone who wants to answer has to raise a hand.
Yeah.
So what does CVE stands for? Oh,
You select who do you want to answer.
I mean, I was looking at him and I saw his hand going first. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Common vulnerabilities and exposures.
yeah, that's correct.
Okay, please come over the stage. Okay. He's the one who has won lot of goodies from the event. From
Great. So
almost,
this conference is proving a good one for you.
yeah, another question.
The next one is like we saw 10. Answer any 3. Oh, he's the one.
Authorization, upgrading.
No, so I think I mispronounced the question. It's like I shared 10 security tools. Answer any 3. No? So now we see a lot of hands.
Client
I mean-
and twin,
You have to choose.
twin lock,
Yeah, let him-
twist lock,
And?
other one is cubescan.io.
Okay, yeah.
Please come over the stage. Okay, thank you. May I now request Mr. Gary Gruber, President at Gruber Consulting, to felicitate the speaker.
Hey, Gary.
Certificate of our appreciation for speaking.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks
you
a
very
lot.
much.
I think he's asking for a picture. Can you make it for me?
And a token of our appreciation for all
Thank
your
you.
hard work and the great presentation.
Yep,
Thank
thanks
you
a
very
lot.
much.